Alright, so the first thing that I want us to see here, this is my arm, this is my humerus, so that's the head of my humerus, this is my radius and ulna, then I've got my carpals, and then my fingers. So really what we're just looking at is this biceps right now. So what we see is we see that we have this muscle here, outlined in black right there. So we see that we have the muscle itself. And then we have these attachments. So here's an attachment in this darker shade of reddish brown, and there's an attachment. So one by the humerus, one by the radius ulna. We'll give some names to that in a minute, and we'll give a name to it now. So this attachment, this indirect attachment, this is made of dense irregular connective tissue, and this is called a tendon. So this thing that's connecting muscle to bone is called a tendon. And again, it's made of dense, irregular connective tissue. Interestingly enough, we just learned last unit of some other things made of dense, irregular connective tissue. If you remember this surrounding layer, this layer around bone, what did we call that? This layer around bone. That was called the periosteum. So this periosteum kind of just extends. So let me draw a new bone. So let's say that's the head of the humerus. Here's my bone. And I have this periosteum surrounding this bone, this dense irregular connective tissue layer. Well, coming off of that, this just extends off, and it thickens into this rope-like structure called a tendon. So tendons are indirect attachments that are rope-like structures. We'll talk about one that's shaped like something else soon. But we want to draw this muscle. And remember back here, we said that we have these connective tissue wrappers. So this dense irregular connective tissue extending off a bone, extending off this periosteum, is going to become this attachment called a tendon. And then that tendon is going to, that dense irregular connective tissue is going to keep extending, and then it's going to surround this whole muscle. So let's look at a few different things. Let me get a new picture up. Okay, so what I'm showing you now, I know it looks like a bunch of circles, but it's a muscle. So if we took this muscle and we cut it like that, and we were looking at a cross section of this muscle, so we're looking at something like this, this is what we might see. So what we're seeing here, first let's identify the fact that we have this connective tissue layer that's on top of this muscle. So let's just go ahead and draw that in. This is a connective tissue wrapper around this whole muscle. Now we have a few more connective tissue wrappers. So this next thing, I'm just going to call it a thing, I'll give it a name in a sec. This is a connective tissue wrapper, and we're going to say that, let's see if you can get some root words. So this connective tissue word is mysium, but we have a few different mysiums. We have a mysium on top of the muscle. We have a mysium surrounding a bundle of muscle cells. And then we have a mysium that's surrounding one individual muscle cell. So let's give some names to these things. First, we have this layer that's on top. So this connective tissue wrapper on top of the muscle. If you thought epi, then you have epimysium. Good job. Next, we need one surrounding. So what is your root word for surrounding? So if you got perimysium, then you got this one right. I know you might think mesomysium for the middle connective tissue layer, but that's not what we're doing. This is perimysium. And then surrounding an individual muscle cell, we have this lining layer of connective tissue. What's the lining or the inside layer of connective tissue? That is called endo. So your endomysium. So now let's work back towards a bigger approach. Instead of talking about the connective tissues, let's talk about the muscles. So this muscle cell, we'll say this individual muscle cell, this elongated muscle cell that we're looking at out here, we can call this a muscle cell. We could also call this a muscle fiber, and it means the same thing. And another word that we can use is myofiber. So myo is your root word for muscle. We'll see this a lot. Myo means muscle. So this is a muscle fiber. This is an individual single muscle cells. This bundle of muscle cells, this big circle right there that I just circled, a bundle of muscle cells, a grouping of muscle cells is called a fascicle. and it might be a fascicle. Yeah, I don't think there's that extra C in there. So this is a fascicle. It's a group of muscle cells. Now, how do I remember this? I say that a fascicle, I think of a fascicle as a big grouping of cubicles. So fascicle cubicles. So I have a bunch of cubicles in there, and who goes into a cubicle? An individual will go into a cubicle to work. So these individual muscle cells, these individual myofibers, are located within this big grouping of muscle fibers called a fascicle. That has this surrounding called a perimysium. It's another connective tissue wrapper. And then a bunch of fascicles are going to make up the a bunch of fascicles are going to make up this whole muscle surrounded in this connective tissue layer called the epimysium. Let's do a little mental map. So a mental map is something that we're using on the test just to help us give a quick reference to separate information that is kind of similar. So what we have these kind of similar muscles. We have to separate the difference of what these different muscle groupings are. So muscle versus a smaller fascicle versus a smaller individual muscle cell. And then when we look at these connective tissue wrappers, we have a connective tissue layer on top of the whole muscle surrounding this fascicle and lining the individual muscle cell. We want to know what these are made up of. So if you remember that this epimysium is kind of an extension of the tendon, which was an extension of this periosteum, you can just think of it that way. I don't know what the embryological development comes first. But this is dense, irregular connective tissue. Perimysium is also dense, irregular connective tissue, dict. And then this endomysium, this is reticular connective tissue. And let's see why. If you think about dense irregular connective tissue, it's really stiff, it's really fibrous, it doesn't allow us to move a lot. So you don't want this dense irregular connective tissue around these individual muscle cells, because don't forget, these muscle cells are made up of these contractile units called myofibrils, and these individual units called sarcomeres, and these smaller things called myofilaments. We're about to get into all that. But the whole point is all this stuff is moving. So if it's moving, if it was held by dense irregular connective tissue, we wouldn't get this shortening and thickening, this contracting. So we have dense irregular connective tissue to hold all these bigger elements of the muscle in place, but these actual sliding, moving parts, this is covered by reticular connective tissue. So it makes more of a mesh than this wrapper. Okay. There's some other things I want to do before I get into some smaller anatomy. So I know I want to differentiate those attachments. So we have the tendon. First, let's separate direct muscle attachments versus indirect. So direct and indirect. A direct muscle attachment is it's going to be muscle straight to bone, so no tendon connecting muscle to bone, or muscle to cartilage. You see this muscle to cartilage in the ribs. I don't know where you see muscle to bone. But that's what it is. It doesn't use these indirect attachments, these indirect connective tissue attachments. And the two that we've seen a rope-like connective tissue attachment, this tendon. Or we can have a sheet, and the sheet is called an aponeurosis. This was the one in the hand. So if I drew my carpals, and then I drew my metacarpals and phalanges, I might have this anatomy wrong. Just work with me. The whole point is I have this sheet of connective tissue that's connecting this to right here. So when I have these muscles in my wrists contracting, I get this connection, this indirect connection to these bones that allows for this movement to occur. So direct attachment, we don't see too many of these, and then these indirect attachments. These indirect attachments are made of connective tissue, this dense, irregular connective tissue, and we've seen the rope-like connective tissue back here with this tendon, and then we saw the aponeurosis right up here. Alright, one more thing to end the video, or is the difference between the attachments. So you have two attachments for each muscle And just want to make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, cool. So yeah, we know that these skeletal muscles are attached to bones, and when they contract, they cause the bones to move. So if I was going to draw that humerus, here's the head of the humerus coming down like that. And then I know I have my radius and my ulna like this, so that means I have the bicep up here. And my bicep actually connects in two places. It attaches to the head of the humerus, so like this, via a tendon, and then another tendon down here on your radius ulna. So if you contract go ahead and flex your bicep. If you flex your bicep, what moves? Your shoulder or your forearm? Hopefully you can see that your forearm rises like this, and then it'd be in this position, so this 90-degree flexion. So you have a point of attachment at a stationary bone and a point of attachment at the bone that moves. So the stationary attachment, this is called the origin of the muscle. Where it attaches to the movable bones is where it's inserted. We call this muscle insertion. Everything in between, all this meaty red stuff in here, this is either called the belly of the muscle or also called the gaster of the muscle. Sweet. So now I'm going to end this video, and then we'll go into the microscopic details of skeletal muscle.